All right. Make sure I unfreeze here. All right. So like I said, the mini lesson for today is on converting a percent to a decimal. All right. Converting a percent to decimal. So hopefully that we know or need to understand a percent is always out of 100, right? Think about grades that you get, right? It's always the highest grade that you can get to 100%. So anytime that we're talking about percents, they are out of 100, which means that our fractions are always out of 100. Our decimals go to the hundredths place, okay? So if you want to make a note of that, you can say that a percent is always out of 100. So our decimal goes to the hundredths place, or you can think about it as 2 decimal places. And your fraction always has a denominator of 100, right? This is also one of the earlier lessons in decimals and fractions and things like that. So just make sure that you kind of grasp that concept. Like I said, think about grades. Your grade's always out of 100. That's the highest that you can get. That's why it's in your denominator there. 2 decimal places if you're talking about decimals, and a percent's always out of 100, okay? So what we're working on is converting between these 3 different ways that we can show percents, all right? And we're specifically today going to look at percents to a decimal, right? So this first example I'll kind of do on my own. It's really just a matter of taking something and moving your decimal point over to write it as decimal, or move some things around to write it as a fraction. Say we're given 70%, okay? We want to write that as decimal. Well, like I said, we know 70% is the same thing as 70 over 100. Which as a whole number, as we saw with the percent there, is just 70. Or 70.0. Okay. In order to write this whole number as a decimal, we're going to put that decimal point at the end. So we see here, so 70.0, or you can actually just kind of avoid that 0.0 in general. We're going to take the decimal point and we're going to move it 2 places to the left. So we'll take it, we'll move it 1 place here, another place here. And that's signifying that we moved it 2 places, like 2 hundredths almost. So tens place, hundredths place, and my decimal for 70% is 0.70. And that's essentially all that you need to do for a problem like this. You take your whole number, put a decimal place at the end, move it 2 places to the left. All right, it's important that you remember to go to the left, because as we progress forward, we're going to do the opposite of this. So making it decimal to a percent, you're going to move it to the right. But for today, you're moving it to the left 2 places. And then that would be your final answer. So 70% as a decimal is 0.7. Okay. Any questions about that first example? Something else you can think about, that first place is the tenths place, right? We'll think about 70 is 7 tenths, right? So 7, or 10 times 10 times 10, 7 times, right? So you have 7 in the tenths place, or 0.7, that's your 70, okay? Let's take a look at the next example. So we want to convert 6% to a decimal. So judging off of what we did the first time, what would be the first thing that I want to write? Because in the first example, I took that 70, I put a decimal point at the end. What might I want to do here? Yeah. 6 over 100. Okay. So we'll write 6 over 100, which we know is just 6. And I'll put a decimal place at the end, right? And then how many times do I have to move that decimal point and in what direction? 2 to the left. Good. So I'll move it once, and I'm right behind that 6 now. And then I have to move it again. And my decimal point's over here. Where do I have to fill in with that gap there? 0. Good. And now my decimal for 6% is 0.06. So one thing that you can think about too is that your individual numbers, so the single whole numbers, 0 through 1 through 9, it's going to be 0.01 or 0.02. When it gets to double digits, that's when you start putting it in that tens place. So 0.1 is 10. We saw 0.7 is 70, right? Things like that. Any questions about that example? Why don't you try this one on your own? Convert 36% to a decimal. And then you tell me what the decimal should be. It'll give you like a minute or so to kind of just navigate that. It shouldn't take too long. And just a heads up for the assignment, so the fraction itself isn't something that you might need to write, but it's also good to get in the habit of understanding what that would look like as a fraction, because we will eventually work with converting things from decimals to fractions and vice versa. So also good to write that down if you have not done so already. What is the what's the decimal for 36%?
0.36.
Good. 0.36. Did everybody get that? As I walked around, I saw a lot of people had that down as well. So that's 36 over 100. You take the 36, the decimal point there, move it 2 to the left, and you have 0.36 for your final answer. Okay? Any questions about any of those examples, anything that we did today? So you really just take it, move it 2 to the left. If you have to fill in a gap, you fill it with a 0. A lot of times, like I said, that'll be with a individual whole number. Cool? Any questions at all? Okay.
I have a question for you guys. What if you forget which way to move the decimal point? Is there another way you can figure out? Okay, well, I hear what you're saying, so, but you guys have to remember to move it the correct direction, but what if you forget? What if you're outside or something like that, you just forget, which way to move it? What you notice on the example, you see the fraction where it says 6 over 100, 36 over 100, what can you do with that fraction? In your calculator. Okay, but how do you know which way to move it though? Say you forget, you just forget to move it to the left or to the right. Right. Another way you can do it is just in your calculator, that fraction right there is division. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So you can always find it that way too. In case you forget, if you do forget, which way to do it, then just divide.
Good. So there's another reason to write the fraction down as well, right? And you can always use that resource to check too if you forget how to do it by hand. Good. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Okay. For the remainder of the class period then,